The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Robert Robinson, Greg Byrne, and Tracy Barnes here with you to continue our Readiness Transaction Manager training. This afternoon we'll be doing the Correspondence training, which is a supplement to the training that we did last week, just on the general Readiness Transaction Manager training. So today we'll be going through a demonstration of the new improvements to the RAD resource desk, as well as doing a role-play kickoff call, and then of course answer your questions and show you lots of new features on the RAD resource desk. Greg, anything you want to say before we get rolling?
No, just apologies again for last week, but hopefully we'll make up for it today.
Yeah, so those of you who have done this before, the GoToWebinar allows us to do a couple of things, but most importantly, it allows you as the participant to raise your hand when you have questions. This slide again shows you how to do that. One thing to remember, and we did have a couple people last time struggle a little bit with this, you do have to enable your audio pin to be able to be heard. So those of you who are called in on your computer and using your computer speakers without a microphone, you unfortunately won't be able to ask questions. But the rest of you, ask a question, raise your hand, we'll see that, and we'll call on you. As we did last time, we'll probably call on you at various stages throughout the presentation. So be patient with us. You can leave your hand up, and we will get to you. So today's focus is on the RAD resource desk. The resource desk has been used for the first part of RAD conversions, I think very successfully for the PHAs and for the transaction managers to track their process through the various milestones in the RAD conversions. But again, the main piece of the RAD resource desk is really to provide a single point of entry for your RAD processing work. So you as the Readiness Transaction Manager will have one place to go to be able to do your work. The PHA that you're working with will be able to have one place to go to do their work, and the public housing field offices will have one place to go to be able to do their work. So each participant has a different point of entry. Again, to remind you, you as a Readiness Transaction Manager can only see the transactions that you have been assigned. The PHA that you're working with can only see the transactions that they have applied for. So if they've only applied for one conversion, they'll see one transaction. If they've applied for multiple conversions, they'll see those multiple transactions. But they cannot see any other PHAs. Similarly, with the field offices, you'll be able to see the transactions that you're working on in your field office, but not any of the other ones. There are broader access to branch chiefs and RAD general managers and that sort of thing, so they can see more. But for our purposes today, we'll be talking about the functionality if I'm a Readiness Transaction Manager. The resource desk really is the processing center for RAD conversions. The design of the resource desk was such that all of the steps that are necessary for a RAD conversion can be handled on this single web portal. It allows you, the transaction manager, to keep notes. It also allows you to be able to correspond with the PHA, and similarly, it allows the PHA to correspond back to you. And so it's a great way for one-stop shop, if you will. You log into the resource desk and do all of your work for a RAD conversion. All of the transaction information is captured on the resource desk. When a PHA's transactions are loaded into the resource desk, all the information from their application is pulled into the web portal. They then have a starting point to begin their conversions. You as a Readiness Transaction Manager are able to see the general information in the beginning, and then you're able to see things as they evolve, as things change. The PHA can give you additional information, or they can make some changes themselves. But this allows for all of the information to be in one place. You don't have to bounce around between different locations to capture things. Additionally, as the process moves through, all of the documentation that the PHA is required to submit will reside on the resource desk. So as the Readiness Transaction Manager, again, your job is to get the PHA ready to submit their financing plan. So as they're doing that, they can upload documents. Once they do their financing plan, all of the financing plan documents will be uploaded to the resource desk, and the financing transaction manager who reviews that transaction will be able to see and comment on all of the documents and continue the correspondence with the PHA as the process evolves. Lastly, I do want to point out the critical nature of the administrative record. The RAD Resource Desk provides both accurate and timely reporting for upper management as well as you as the Readiness Transaction Manager. All of the correspondence that you have with the PHA, documenting your kickoff call, documenting your follow-up call, exchanges that you have where the PHA is asking questions or filling out information and you are going back and forth with them, that all lives on the resource desk so that when, as you, the Readiness Transaction Manager, work through getting them to submit a complete financing plan, all of the information will be in one place so that when a financing transaction manager takes over, there'll be a documented record of all the things that you went through, questions that you may have had, comments that you want to share. We did talk about last week the fact that some Readiness Transaction Managers may also be financing transaction managers, but in a lot of cases that won't be the case. So you want to make sure that as a Readiness Transaction Manager, you're keeping good notes to be able to hand this transaction off to the next party that's going to be looking at it. For the PHA, the resource desk provides a couple things. First and foremost, it gives them the responsibility to reach the 180-day milestone, the financing plan submission. A lot of feedback during the early stages of RAD where many PHAs and others felt like there was too many milestones in between and too much administrative burden. And so, the HUD folks listened to that and said, okay, we're going to open it up and we're going to let you put the things together on a schedule that matches what you want to do. However, everyone needs to get the financing plan submission in 180 days. So however you want to do that, that's the definitive mark in the sand, line in the sand. So this allows for the PHA to do things at their own pace, but be held accountable to that 180-day goal. You as the Readiness Transaction Manager provide resources for them to get them there, but you don't do the work for them. The resource desk provides for those resources as well as providing for a space to give concise instructions to the PHAs so that they are seeing this is what they need to do. We talked about it on the call. This is what you agreed to do. The PHA then comes back and either does it or doesn't do it, and there's a record there for everybody to see. It's also going to relieve some of the back and forth that I know transaction managers have struggled with a little bit as their branch chiefs and RAD senior managers are interested in information on specific transactions. Now they too can go to the resource desk and see the steps that have been taken and a nice, concise list of steps that are being taken to move through the process. So that's kind of the overarching themes of the resource desk for you. What I wanted to do now is actually spend a few minutes to talk through the resource desk and show you the changes that have been made since the demo program started 2 years ago. Many of you will be familiar with the login screen. So here we are at the login screen to the resource desk. And I'm going to log in as a transaction manager, just like you all will be logging in. When you log into the resource desk, this will be the same thing that you've seen in the past. You'll have an access to your PHA libraries, which is the work that you're doing, uploading documents and that sort of thing, reviewing documents, as well as the other resources that are available on the resource desk, which we have other trainings that are already posted for you to look at. So I'm not going to spend any time on the other features because most of those remain unchanged. But I am going to click on the PHA libraries. And immediately, those of you who have been here before are going to notice a pretty significant difference. You now have 3 blue bars that show up. Where in the past you've had some review information that's shown up at the top, but basically you've seen what transactions you have under the 60,000 listed by transaction. So what I want to show now, so what you would have seen at the top is if you had a transaction that was listed in under 60, all of your transactions were listed with the various milestones that were due. So if you're a transaction manager today and you're becoming a readiness transaction manager next, this will be a way that you can separate that work out. For the PHA, for the second round, however, we've listed things by PHA because regardless of how many transactions the PHA will be converting, the initial stage during the readiness period will focus on getting the PHA ready to submit all of their financing plans. So in this case, we've set up a sample PHA, and when I click on the sample PHA, I get a new screen. And this screen is broken into different sections. The top section gives you information generally about the PHA. Primarily, who is the point of contact, most likely the executive director, as well as over on the right-hand side, we've added the ability to capture other PHA contacts. Many of you who have worked through RAD before know that while the executive director is often the one that has to sign and approve things, they're not the ones that are doing the day-to-day work. There may be a consultant working with the PHA, or there may be other PHA staff who are participating in moving this transaction through the RAD conversion. All of those folks will be listed over here by name. It will include their email address as well as a phone number, so that if you need to call them and contact them and you're working in the resource desk already, you don't have to open up your contacts in Outlook and bounce between different applications. So we've added that feature here. All of the PHA contacts that are listed on this section will be receiving notification when you send correspondence to the PHA. So I'm going to drop down in this middle section here where you see check-in correspondence summary. So this section is viewable by both you and the PHA and is meant to track one of the things that I was talking about a minute ago. It is meant to track the back and forth that you have with the PHA on your kickoff call and then on your monthly or every 6-week checkup calls. Whatever you decide to do with your PHA, whatever you all agree upon, this section is meant to capture summary information from those calls, the next steps that are necessary by the PHA to move forward, any problems that the PHA is seeing, any guidance that you as the transaction manager may provide. Those are all done in this section here. In order to make things clearer, below this little box will show the last 2 correspondence that have been sent. We've added a couple of buttons here because we know that there'll be lots of back and forth with the PHAs, and so you'll be able to click on this View History button, which will pull up a new little window that shows all the correspondence that you've had with the PHA since the beginning. The ability to do that and check your notes rather than having them all listed here and making this page become a little bit unruly was a feature that we really wanted to make sure that you all were using, because again, the expectation is that this section will be used a lot. Also, for those of you who do like to print things out, we've added a little print button here for you. On the left-hand side of this screen, we've also created a section for just the Readiness TM comments. Now, these are comments that you as the Readiness Transaction Manager will write to yourself, or again, in preparation for the financing plan being submitted, things that you'd like to make sure the financing transaction manager would like to know. For those of you who have been doing the RAD work before, this will replace what you've been doing for like pipeline calls and those sorts of reports. Again, we've got the ability to keep the last set of notes. I think on the presentation on Wednesday, I might have done a little test here, so we'll do another test today. And you'll see how the comment sections will grow. So we save that comment. It'll drop down below here, and now we have a series of 2 comments. When I click on the View History button, all of the comments come, and so when we add another one, that will expand to include the 3rd, where only the last 2 will show up. The nice thing about this particular box is that many of you have been using the comment boxes to track the progress of your transactions, putting dates in each of the kind of separate lines, and then this box has become a little bit unruly from that perspective. And so now everything will be date stamped for you. You won't have to worry about keeping a running record in your comment box itself. So these 2 sections we feel like will allow you to do two critical things. One, communicate with the PHA to get their timely submission of the financing plan, as well as keep notes to yourself around how the transaction is moving. And then allow your branch chief and others to see the progress and see the notes that you've been taking. The next two boxes have been created for you as the transaction manager to quickly track some of the more important features as the PHA is moving towards financing plan submission and you're going through your readiness check. The pre-development section basically is a track of the kickoff call, first and foremost. So when you hold the kickoff call, you'll want to populate this date. Certainly in the early stages of these chaps being issued, that's going to be a very important thing for your branch chiefs and others to see that, that the RAD process is moving forward and kickoff calls are being held. So I'm imagining that certain reports will be developed to say which ones haven't been held, and you as transaction managers will want to make sure that you're getting these done in a timely fashion. It'll also be an opportunity to track some of the general questions about the PHA as they move through the transaction. For example, significant amendments to an annual plan. Those are going to be required regardless of how many transactions this PHA is converting. So it's important for the PHA to get moving on producing a significant amendment to the annual plan if they're required to do so. Also, a couple of other things that we thought were highlighted important items would be whether or not they're doing PBV conversions, and if they're a PBV administering agency. If not, they're going to need to get one. So this section is really going to be probably changing over time as we figure out which questions are most important for you all to be asking and tracking that are more PHA specific. But right now, this is the group that we've identified at the top.
And Robert, just to add.
Sure, Greg, go ahead.
This page, as it's currently structured in terms of those top-level questions, probably makes the most sense if I've got a PHA with one project or two project converting. But if I have a PHA that's got multiple projects in different phases, that they may have the ownership structure for the first phases, but they don't have them for the second phases or something like that. So, as Robert mentioned, we'll modify this as we go along, as we get into this and learn more from experience, kind of what's the best way to capture some of the meta issues and then what things to put on the grid below. But at least you get a sense of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I do want to stress with everyone is that as we're moving through this process, you, the transaction manager, are a very valuable resource for us to modify and make changes to improve the work processing that you all are going through. So please feel free to send us ideas and suggestions as we're developing this. The next section is an attempt to capture the critical items on each property without having to go into the property details page. So just as a reminder, if I click on the property itself, this will take us to what those of you who have been through this process before are much more familiar with, which is kind of the milestone section, if you will, of the property transaction. We're not imagining that very many readiness transaction managers will need to use this page, but so you know how the process is developing, this will be the page that the financing transaction manager will be using, because this is where the documents that the financing plan and other items that are coming in will be living. But this page, the idea was that we would be able to capture property-specific information about the transactions that are going to impact when they can get their financing plan in and the adequacy of the financing plan once they submit it. So these columns across here allow you, as the Readiness Transaction Manager, to update information as things change. So all of this information will be pre-populated for you from the application. But oftentimes, things change. So, for example, maybe they decide that for this transaction, they're actually going to be a PBV conversion, not PBRA conversion. You can change that right here. Financing structure, if that changes, you can change it here. But also importantly, tracking when the PCAs have been ordered. As Greg mentioned, for multiple transactions, things are going to be on different phases and different timings. And certainly, the PCA being ordered could fall in that category. but it's important that the PHA know that they need to order them early. And so you, as the Readiness Transaction Manager, want to make sure that you're following up with each PHA to make sure that you can be selecting yes here as quickly as possible. A couple other things that have been very important. Relocation. Is there relocation at the site? If so, is it going to be permanent relocation, temporary relocation? How are they going to pay for it? How are they going to handle it? These are questions that you are going to want to be asking the PHA, and these checkboxes will be important places for you to either remind yourself or the PHA that something needs to be done here for the financing plan. One of the things that we are considering adding to this section will be the ability for the readiness checklist to be embedded in the resource desk itself. And so out here to the right of the Save button, there'll be a button that actually says Readiness Checklist. And when you click on that button, the Readiness Checklist will pop up, and you'll be able to populate it there and be able to send that to the PHA once they're ready to submit to the financing plan. So that certification that their readiness check has been completed will be embedded here in the resource desk itself. We think that's going to be an important feature for you as a Readiness Transaction Manager as you move through processing these transactions. Okay? So that's what the new resource desk looks like. And what I wanted to do next is talk about the kickoff call.
Hey, Robert, before you get there,
sure.
Are you going to talk at all about the PIH landing page now or later?
No, I'm happy. You want me to describe it here?
Yeah, just because I know we have a lot of PIH staff. So yeah, just talk a little bit about sort of where we're moving with that.
Sure. So the public housing field offices will also have a landing page similar to what the Readiness Transaction Manager will have. And the idea there is for them, they will see similar background information, but they will see all of the various items that are really PIH in PIH's court. So for example, the significant amendment to the annual plan. Since the Readiness Transaction Manager is not able to either review or approve those, that's a public housing function, but that's a critical piece to getting the financing plan submitted. There will be a place where the PIH field offices can log that information on the resource desk. Then it will flow through so that the Readiness Transaction Manager and the Financing Transaction Manager and the Public Housing Authority, for that matter, will know that that has been both submitted and approved. And you can see that through the resource desk. Relocation checklist, another area. Non-dwelling units, another critical piece that the field office provides information on. So all of the areas of the transaction that the integration with public housing is so important and so critical. The public housing folks will have their own landing page to be able to track those items so that they can see where they are during the transaction. PIH will also be able to see these other areas so they can see how things are moving through and monitor how the information is going through the process. Public housing will be asked to set up the kickoff calls and then participate in the ongoing calls moving forward, so they'll be able to see the exchanges going back and forth between the Readiness Transaction Manager and the public housing folks. Anything you wanted to add to that, Greg?
Just that the recap office and PIH leadership are just currently kind of working through what that landing page will look like and what items will be on it. But we think it will be a helpful tool for everybody involved. Should ease the flow of information.
Great. So I want to spend a few minutes and talk about the kickoff call. As we mentioned in the last training, once the chaps are issued to the PHAs will all receive one, initial login information for the resource desk, and two, the team has developed a welcome kit for the PHAs to read and review before the kickoff call. The idea with the welcome kit was to provide some background information on RAD, some kind of tools for them to use, as well as some best practices that have been developed over the last couple of years as the initial RAD conversions have been done. So prior to the kickoff call, the PHA should have read the welcome guide, so they won't be welcome kit, so they won't be totally in the dark, and you as the Readiness Transaction Manager won't be having to do a lot of background information for them. But it will give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. In conjunction with the public housing field offices who will schedule the calls and participate with the calls, who often know these PHAs and have that relationship, this will be an opportunity for you as the Readiness Transaction Manager to be introduced, insert yourself into the process, and be another piece of the puzzle for the PHAs as they start working through their RAD conversion. It will be, we have developed a script for you to use. It's very detailed. It'll be posted on the resource desk, and a nice tool for you to use to walk through this checklist to make sure that you're getting all the things covered in the kickoff call that we think are important to be covered. It'll be setting the expectations, first and foremost, that you're working towards the PHA submitting their financing plan, in most cases within 180 days of CHAP issuance or the revised notice publish date. So we are thinking, Greg, beginning of April on the notice, mid-April?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Probably.
So for those CHAPs that are being issued as we speak, they will have 180 days from that revised notice being published in mid-April. For those CHAPs that get issued after that, it will be from CHAP issuance date. For tax credit transactions, the actual financing plan due date is driven off of when their tax credit applications are due. For transactions that have already applied for and received their application, their tax credits, they'll be on this milestone just like everybody else. But for those that have not submitted for an application yet, or they've submitted and they haven't heard yet, the financing plans are due 60 days after the tax credits are awarded to them. So that will be a slight modification. For FHA transactions, senior management is still discussing what the current cutoff will be for those, but it will be within 180, 240 days, somewhere in there, and there'll be guidance around that in the coming months. The other piece of the kickoff call will be to make sure that the PHA knows where the various resources that they have for RAD are. Obviously, a further introduction to the resource desk. You yourself, as the Readiness Transaction Manager, as a resource to point them in different directions, as well as possibly being able to get them some additional support, as we discussed in the last training. And then for you as a Readiness Transaction Manager, it's going to be very important in the kickoff call to get a sense of what the PHA is doing in these RAD conversions. So whether it's one property that's converting or 30 properties that are converting, you're going to want to get a sense from the PHA what they're doing, how it impacts their general portfolio. Are they leaving public housing altogether, i.e. converting all of their properties? Are they doing it in phases? Is this initial award part of a portfolio? Just getting a sense of what's going on and what their properties look like. And where are they in the process? Have they already applied for and received tax credits? Are they thinking about tax credits? Have they got a plan for rehab and they were just looking for an opportunity to be able to borrow some money, and RAD's a perfect opportunity for them to do that? Those sorts of things. And then laying out the next steps. Again, with an eye on that financing plan submission, what does the PHA need to do within the next 2, 3, 4 weeks to continue that process along so that they're getting into a good spot to submit their financing plan in 180 days.
And just to remind everyone that you know, these CHAP awards that we're making, those deals are 13, 15, 17 months old in terms of when they actually submitted their RAD application and when we're now issuing the CHAPs. So they're very likely to be stale. And so some, the good ones would be we just need to freshen them up a bit. In other cases, PHAs may have kind of forgotten what they proposed and hadn't given it any thought since then. So we just want you not to assume that whatever they put in the application is really what's viable today.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very important point because, as Greg mentioned, a lot of these have been sitting on the shelf for a long time, and things will have changed. And also from experience in the early stages of RAD, once they get a PCA going, things may change there as well. So looking for keeping the tabs on where things are and where things are moving. So what we wanted to do now was I wanted to have Greg and Tracy and I walk through a little simulation of what a RAD kickoff call might look like. Again, we will have a kickoff call script that is posted for you all to use and follow. In this simulation, I generally followed the script, but to keep it from being too formulaic and try and make it a little bit more conversational, we will bounce around a little bit. But the major topics that need to be covered will be covered during this simulation. So hopefully this will give you a sense of what we're looking for when you do your own calls. So to that end, we will kick off our simulation. So good afternoon. My name is Robert Robinson, and I'm assigned the Readiness Transaction Manager for Sample Housing Authority. And I think I hear Greg Byrne from the field office on the line. Greg, are you out there?
Yes, good afternoon, Robert. I believe that the folks from Sample are also on the line. Is that correct?
Yes, we're here. This is Tracy Barnes. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Sample. Nice to speak with you again, Greg, and Robert, nice to meet you. So I have a few other folks here with me. I have my CFO, Charles Howell. I also have my Senior Project Manager, Sally Closer, and we also have our architect, Bob Builder. And we're all looking forward to working with you both on our RAD conversions.
Great, thank you, Tracy. It is definitely nice to meet you, if not in person, on the phone. So, and certainly hope it's warmer in Alabama than it is up here in D.C. We're certainly getting a lot of cold weather, but wanted to thank Greg for setting up the call and making the time to participate with us today. We've got a number of things that we want to cover, and I'm glad that you've got a good group in attendance. That always makes things a little bit more helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. There are actually a few other folks that we may need to have participate in some future calls, but for today's call, we thought that the four of us would, should be enough. So it's just us four today, but maybe more people next time.
That's great, and please feel free to include others as you see fit. We really feel like that anybody that's involved in the conversion can definitely benefit from these update calls, so we're happy to have them. But let's jump into the meat of the call, and I'd like to get a sense of where you are in your planning and processing. First off, have you ever had any RAD experience before, or is this your first foray into RAD?
Well, of course, we did know about the program before, but this is actually our very first-hand experience, so we're probably going to need a lot of guidance.
Well, I figured that, but that's hopefully between the welcome kit and this call, you'll get enough of a sense of where things are going, and then certainly as we're moving forward, I want to be here to provide any assistance that you need in putting things together, again, with our goal to get a financing plan put in place in the next 180 days. So did you get a chance to look at the welcome guide?
Yes, I did, Robert. I have seen the guide and I did read through it, but I can't really say that I'm now an expert on RAD.
Well, I don't know why not. I mean, the welcome guide covers just about everything, Tracy.
I'm a slow learner, Robert.
Well, fair enough. But we do think that the welcome guide is a nice piece, and hopefully you'll find it useful and something that you can refer back to from time to time. There's some kind of best practices and some tips that I think as you're developing your financing plan will make even more sense as we're moving forward. But also know that the resource desk itself is a great guide for you. And I know that you, Tracy, received an email with login information generally for the PHA to get on the resource desk. Have you had a chance to log in and get your staff set up yet?
Well, I'm logged in, but to be honest, I'm a little bit confused about the resource desk, and although I'm logged in, I don't really have everyone else set up yet, so hopefully maybe you can give me a little bit more guidance on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the resource desk is a great tool that HUD's developed to help process these RAD conversions, and it really is important for you and all of your staff to sign up and be a part of the resource desk. We've got a great technical support team, so if you have questions moving forward, you can send them a note. I'll give you their email address. It's resourcedesk@radresource.net. You can also find that on the resource desk itself. But really what has to happen is your staff will need to set up an account, and then you as the executive director can log them in. So it's kind of a two-part process, but I really think that it's well worthwhile, and the sooner you do that, the better. But the main purpose of today's call is really for us to kind of walk through what's going to go on with your various projects and set some expectations and talk through some timelines. So do you have any other questions before we jump into that?
Nope, we're all ears, so fire away.
Okay, great. So from a processing standpoint, the thing that sets the stage for all of your RAD conversions is the financing plan. And generally the financing plans are due 180 days after the CHAP award or the release date of the notice, which is coming up in April. So you'll have until that date, 180 days for that on most of your transactions. Although I did see in preparing for this call that Lakeside Apartments looks like you're going to try and do tax credits on those. Have you applied for your tax credits on those yet?
No, we haven't. The applications aren't actually due until August, and then we're going to hear if we got them sometime in the middle of November.
Okay. Well, good. Well, so for Lakeside then, your financing plan isn't going to be due until 60 days after you receive the tax credit award. So it sounds like if you receive those in November, then your financing plan is going to be due in probably mid-January next year. But we'll need to keep tabs on that and make sure that, that we're tracking all that in the resource desk. But for the other two, it seems that probably the beginning of October, depending on when the notice finally gets published, but the beginning of October is going to be when you're going to need to have your financing plan submitted. So unless you change course and do FHA insurance, I think that's where you should be shooting for.
Okay, well, that sounds good, but we have a scattered site situation. I'm just wondering if we can go ahead and submit the scattered site financing plan earlier than that date?
Sure. So if you want to submit early, we're more than happy to help accommodate that, and my job will be to help you get there. So whatever the uniqueness of that particular site is, we can talk about that a little bit later today so that we can make sure that we're giving you whatever resources you need to expedite that process. Just so you know, there is actually a readiness check template, a checklist that we'll be going through that you'll have access to and I'll have access to, and you'll be able to see all the various pieces that need to be put together in order to get the financing plan submitted. Of course, we don't expect all of the documents to be 100% complete until the financing plan submission, but the checklist piece will let us know kind of how you're getting there and what we can do to make that a little bit more, a little bit quicker.
So could you give us an idea of what the readiness check covers?
Absolutely. So the readiness check is going to cover some broad items, such as if you've got your development team in place. So, for example, on the Lakeside transaction, we're going to want to see who all of your tax credit partners are and that tax credit development team is. We're also going to want to see there's an accessibility and relocation plan checklist that needs to be completed. You're going to need to submit a significant amendment to your annual plan. Unless you talked about RAD in your annual plan. Did you talk about RAD in your annual plan this year?
No, we didn't. No.
No, you didn't. Okay. Okay. Well, so in that case, you're going to need to have a significant amendment to the annual plan submitted to the Public Housing Field Office, and they're going to have to approve that for you. So we'll be able to help move that through for you as well. You're also going to need to get going with your RPCA. For example, in the old RAD processing, we would be keeping more close tabs on the milestones and suggested that a PCA be completed in 90 days. But in this case, with the new milestones and focusing on the financing plan, those dates are not set in stone anymore, but we will still use those kind of as a guide, kind of an interim milestones, if you will. So we're just going to make sure that you're progressing along and getting all the different pieces put together. You're going to need to make sure that you've decided whether you're going to go PBRA or PBV, and a number of other things that we'll be developing moving forward. So hopefully, if we can keep you on a pretty good schedule, that 6-month hurdle will not be hard for us to overcome.
All righty. So we've had our chat now for about 3 weeks. So I've been hearing you talking about, the RPCA and other things. So can you give us some idea of what you think we should be focusing on now? Like what should we prioritize in terms of our next steps?
Sure, that's a great thing, and we will definitely do that. But before we do that, let's just step back for just a second so that I can get a better sense of kind of what you're doing with your overall portfolio. I do see that you've got 3 properties that you're converting. We've talked about one of them is going to be a tax credit transaction, but is this your entire public housing portfolio?
No, it's not, Robert. We actually still have a couple of properties that we haven't applied for, and at this point we're just not sure if we're going to be converting them or not.
Okay, well, that's fine. Maybe as we go through this process, you'll decide you want to convert the rest of your portfolio. Just know that if you do decide you want to convert the rest of the portfolio, you're going to have to do separate applications for those. And as we're approaching the 185,000 unit cap that Congress has placed on the RAD program, that may or may not affect whether you're on the wait list or not. So just wanted to make you aware of that. Okay,
we'll definitely keep that in mind.
Perfect. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about the projects that are converting? You've got the tax credit, the lakeside, and then you mentioned a scattered site, but what's the kind of characteristics and what's your portfolio look like?
Okay, well, right now what we have 3 100-unit properties. 2 are family high-rises, and they have 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. And then one is a scattered site project, which is a garden-style apartment that's located in various neighborhoods. So the high-rises, these are housed in, there are 4 2-story buildings, and they're at 2 different locations. They were originally built in 1964. They were rehabbed in the 80s, and then we rehabbed them again maybe about 15 years ago. The garden apartments, those were built at various times over the last 30 years, and they're actually in pretty good shape. So for the RAD conversion, they'll cover all of the units, and then for the first of the 2 family properties, those are the ones that we're planning on doing, that tax credit development that I mentioned.
Hey, Robert, in our area of the woods, anything that's 2-story, we'll call it a high-rise.
Yes, that's true. But make sure we don't have any tornadoes hitting them, right? So have you got a lender in place for those first 2, and a tax credit development team in place for your family property?
Yeah, for the smaller project, we have this local bank that we've used for some of the smaller projects we've done in the past, and we use that same bank for that rehab that I mentioned that we did in 2000. And I think they're going to want to do the entire project with us. We've actually started discussing with them what we're proposing. Of course, there's still some details to be worked out, but we're pretty far along in our discussions. And yeah, we think we have a pretty solid team in place.
Great. Well, that's good to hear, because having a strong lender and getting your loan and tax credit application processes going are critical to the readiness checklist. And going forward, it might be helpful to have them on the call with us, because there are going to be some things that they're going to need to consider as they go through their due diligence. In particular, reminding them that the RAD use agreement is going to be in first position, and that their notes are going to be subordinate to that. And also the fact that each of the properties are going to have to be collateralized separately, and they're not going to be able to do one big loan for those the 2 transactions.
Well, that's good to know, because I think that they did want to use 1 loan for the 2 non-tax credit properties. So I guess from what you're saying, they can't do that?
No, they're not going to be able to do that, unfortunately. They're going to need to do 2 separate loans for each transaction. And you're going to want to look closely at that scattered site property, because HUD multifamily is going to want to be comfortable, as you've got that listed as a PBRA conversion, so multifamily is going to want to be comfortable if that can be managed as a single property. So we're going to want to definitely get the multifamily field offices involved in that conversation as well.
Okay. Well, we'll talk with the bank, and we're going to definitely try and have them on our next call. And then about, you asked about the tax credit project. for that development. We're actually thinking about creating some new units. We're thinking maybe about 20 or so, because we actually have some vacant land. It's in an adjoining lot, and it's just been sitting there for a while, and we've been thinking that this might be our opportunity to actually, get it developed. So I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you're bringing it up, because vacant land is a hot button item for us sometimes. And so, can you give me a little bit more information about that vacant land? Is it part of that tax credit AMP, or do you know?
I'm actually not sure. Let me ask the folks here with me. Does anybody remember? We're going to have to get back to you with that, Robert, because we're actually not sure if this is attached to that AMP or not. But, we really do want to do something with the land in this RAD conversion process. So do you think we'll be able to do that?
Yeah, so if you want to include this in the RAD conversion, first and foremost, we're going to have to find out if the land is part of the AMP. If it is, there's some further approvals that we're going to need to get, and Greg in the field office will be critical in that. So you want to make sure that your legal counsel is involved quickly and take a look at the surveys and see if it's part of that AMP or not, because if it is, we need to jump on that quickly. If it's not part of the AMP and it's part of a general tax credit transaction, I think you probably will be able to include it. But again, this is a hot button item that we need to really make sure that we're on top of early, okay?
Tracy, I think as I remember, this property was acquired before you became executive director, and it was originally going to be for another new site, but you just never got the funds to build it. So I think it's actually separate legally, and so I don't think you're going to be able to make that part of the RAD transaction. You can, separately dispose of it outside of RAD if you want to try to do that under Section 18. But anyway, we'll work closely with you. We'll get that identified and see whether it's actually attached to the AMP, and if it is, what other restrictions you might have.
Okay, thanks, Greg. And after the call, I'll do some more research on it and try and get that nailed down. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Tracy. That's definitely something we want to get to the bottom of as you're putting this together. Another step that's critical to this process is getting the RPCAs ordered. And since you have a lender involved, you're definitely going to want to include them in this process. Have you thought about what you're going to do about your RPCA procurements?
No, not really, but we have this local firm that's done basically all of our CNAs over the years, and they know our friends at the bank, and they've actually always done a really great job for us, so I'm pretty sure they'll be able to do this.
Well, actually, depending on how much other business they do, they may or may not be familiar with the RAD PCA and may or may not be the best firm for this. So while I'm sure they've done a great job for you in the past, I really would encourage you to make sure that you're finding a firm that has done RAD PCAs before. If this firm has done them, great. If not, you really should see if you can find one that's done it maybe in your area. I know that there are a number of PHAs that have, in Alabama, that have done RAD conversion, so maybe you could reach out to one of them and see if they've got somebody that they would recommend.
So if it's that complex, would it be possible for you to recommend someone to us that we could use?
That's a great question, Tracy, and we actually get that all the time. Unfortunately, HUD's in a position where we really can't recommend RPCA contractors. But I can tell you that there are a number of really great firms that can do the work for you, and it really isn't going to be too hard for you to find them. In addition to potentially reaching out to one of your colleagues at another PHA, you can also do a quick internet search for RAD PCA providers, and I'm pretty sure that a number of firms are going to show up on that search, and you can reach out to them. But sadly, we can't recommend anybody for you.
Hey, Tracy, as we've been following RAD for the first round, we've had a bunch of our PHAs really struggle because they didn't get a PCA provider that really understood the RAD requirements. So definitely talk to your friends in the in the state, and they can share with you some of their experiences. But I can't echo enough what Robert's saying about making sure you get a PCA provider who understands the RAD requirements. It's going to just set you back so much if you get the wrong one out the gate.
Okay, well, I hear you. I hear you guys. I'm gonna, you know, I actually went to a conference last month and actually did hear something about, you know, RAD PCAs and how you get them. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and look at the attendee list from that conference and see who I can call and maybe, you know, just get some recommendations about maybe some good firms that I can approach about doing the PCA for projects.
Good, Tracy. I do think that that's going to be the best approach. So I think that'll get you the best work product and really get you moving forward with RAD. So I think that's a good idea. As far as a couple other things that I wanted to talk about, you talked about that you hadn't submitted an annual plan that included RAD, so you're going to need to do a significant amendment to your annual plan. This is something that you probably want to get started on now. Basically, our recommendations for anything that's going to take some time to obtain either a documentation or has some sort of approval process that you have to go through is something that we really recommend you start early as possible. Because if you don't get going early, it's going to make it much more difficult for us to make the 180-day milestone. In terms of
Tracy, also in the RAD notice, there's a sample annual significant amendment format, and you don't have to use it, but it really makes our life easier in the field office if you stick with that. We shouldn't have any problem sort of getting this thing approved in time. But anyway, just familiar, you know, our staff will work with you on that as well.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Yep.
Yeah, so as you're putting all these documents together and we're working together to get your financing plan submitted, I mentioned the Readiness Checklist. Basically what's going to happen with that is once we feel comfortable together that you've got all the various documents ready, we'll go through the checklist and I will give you kind of approval, if you will, to submit your financing plan, and then the transaction likely will be handed over to a financing transaction manager. May or may not be me. Certainly with the tax credit transactions, I haven't done a lot of those, so I'm highly doubtful that I'll do those. But in any event, we'll make sure that we coordinate that handoff because we want to make sure that the financing plan that's submitted is adequate and that all of the information that you provided to me gets handed off to somebody else. So I think we're off to a good start from that perspective.
Okay, doke. So yeah, it does sound, from what you've said, I think we have a pretty clear picture of what we should be doing now. So let's say we get our financing plan in by like the beginning of October, which is actually what we're planning on doing. Would it be possible for us to close the first two by, say, the end of the year or by the early part of 2016? Is that a realistic goal?
Tracy, I think that's probably doable, unless something unexpected comes up. The early part of 2016 is definitely doable. Is there any reason, though, that you really need to close prior to the calendar year end? Something I need to know about?
No, not necessarily. It's just that we just think it would be nice to start the new year with a fresh set of books and have the new PDBs run on a calendar year basis, beginning in January 2016.
So Tracy,
sure,
if you want to do that, though, remember that you're going to need to close those transactions in November, and so your HAP starts. One of the things that your HAP will start on December 1st. If you don't, if you want to sort of get out of the public housing funding, remember that in the RAD notice that that the first initial year of conversion you are funded in the public housing account through the end of the calendar year. It's only with the new calendar year that you're funded out of the multifamily or the voucher account. So if you really want to sort of get everything moved off, then you might want to think about having a closing no later than November. But if that's not an issue for you, then a closing in December would start your HAP on January 1.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great point, Greg. And so, Tracy, you'd mentioned earlier that maybe you wanted to do some of these a little bit more quickly, and that might be something that we should consider. Because if you want to get that done more quickly, then maybe we should be looking at a September, try and push for a September submission of your financing plans.
Okay, well, we work towards that goal, but...
Okay. Well, Well, that's fine. Well, we'll work towards it together, so we'll see where we can get. But one of the things that you just said, though, in looking at your applications, all three of these were going to be PBRA conversions. So you mentioned that the scatter site might be PBV instead.
Oops, sorry about that. Yeah, that was actually a mistake because the scattered site AMP, we're actually planning on converting those to PBV. Is that going to be an issue?
No, it shouldn't be a problem. But I'll need to make that change in the resource desk for you, which I can do. And since you were already planning on creating a new single-purpose entity to own that property, and with the loan in place, I think you should be all set. But if you hadn't been doing that, there are some alternatives that you'd have to explore so that you can remain the sole owner and pay yourself the PBV administrative fee. But there's lots of information around this on the resource desk, so I think you're in good shape on it. But just avail yourself of those FAQs if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, we actually, one of those conferences we went to, we were told about that, and we've done our research, and we think we're in good shape with that, so it should be fine, I think.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad you're on top of that. You mentioned that you're going to be rehabbing the units. Is that going to happen while the tenants are there, or what's your plan on relocation? Are you going to house them somewhere else, or what's your story on relocation?
Yeah, so the rehab, the way we're planning on doing it is how we did it the last time in 2000, which was basically we're going to do them in groups, and fortunately we have another project that we operate. It's pretty close by, so what we're going to do is move residents there temporarily while we do the rehab on their units.
Okay. Well, you'll need to make sure that you submit the RAD Accessibility and Relocation Plan checklist for HUD's approval, and that's something that you're definitely going to want to start getting on sooner rather than later, because we're going to want to see a detailed description of how that's going to work. You're also going to need to remember that any tenants that you relocate during rehab have got to be given the right to return to their unit. So please make sure that you're including that in all of your relocation plans. We've been talking about things that you need to do. It might be helpful if I touched on some of the stuff that the readiness transaction managers will be doing during this process.
Okay, we're listening.
So in addition to doing this kickoff call, I'll also be scheduling regular monthly check-in calls. So you and Greg and whoever else that you will be able to have join us can gauge kind of how things are moving. Make sure that you're on track for meeting our deadlines for financing plan submission. And after every call, including this one, I'm going to send you a summary of what we've discussed, what you agreed to do, any hurdles that we see at the moment, and that will come directly from the resource desk. When you get that email, you'll have a chance to clarify anything on that summary, and it's also a way to keep track of your progress. My branch chief, who I work for, also will be monitoring all of the staff that she's got working under her, and so she can easily see what's going on in all the various transactions that I'm doing. And so it's going to make things a lot easier for everybody to kind of see where the status is. At this point, I don't see that you need any waivers, but in case that does come up during this process, I'll be the person that you'll send them to, and then I can get them processed for you here at HUD.
Okay. So are there any other things that you think we should be thinking about now?
Well, yeah, so I mentioned earlier that you should be working on getting your RPCA ordered as soon as possible, and we talked about making sure that you hired somebody that was qualified to do that. Then we also talked about the resource desk. It's really important for you to check the resource desk for information about the RPCAs, the requirements. There's also environmental reviews that are going to be required, so you're going to want to check on that and see what's going on with those. Any of this can affect the size and types of the loan that you're doing, so you want to make sure that your lenders are involved in this conversation as well.
Okay, doke. And just to let you know, we're going to be having a meeting next week to talk about that vacant lot I mentioned. We're going to make a final decision on whether or not to develop it. But it sounds like we still need to, even despite what we may decide, we need to confirm if the lot is even part of this transaction. So we have quite a lot of work to do with respect to that site. And just one other question at this point, just something that you mentioned earlier about using the resource desk. You're going to be using it to communicate with us, so is that how we should also communicate with you?
Yeah, so generally I think that's going to be a great way for you to communicate with us. After I send out the summary of the calls, you can come back with a clarification if you need to. Certainly, if you have a small question or something comes up, feel free to call or email me. But generally, major items and changes we really would like to see on the resource desk. We want to see the RPCA when it's available, your lender commitment letters, and those sorts of things. So to get me really set to be able to finish up the readiness checklist, it's important that you're posting things within the resource desk.
Okay, so there are going to be other people besides me who are going to be working on this project, and of course, because I have other things to do, I don't necessarily want everything to have to come through me in terms of uploading those documents or pieces of information to the resource desk. So I guess would it be possible for other people to have access to the resource desk, the other folks who are going to be working on this project with me?
Right. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, you definitely want your staff to have access to the resource desk, and then you will be able to delegate different responsibilities to them inside the web portal itself. So again, you should have an email that has your login information to the resource desk. Once you go there, you should see all of your staff that have hopefully asked for accounts to be executed, and then you can give them various different accesses. You can provide read-only access to some of your staff. You can allow some of your staff to be able to upload documents. So it kind of gives you a way to be able to control internally what's going on with your staff. And so, as I said before, the resource desk, help desk, more than happy to help out if you need things. So just reach out to us or them as you need any help.
Okay, well, we definitely do that. Yep.
Hey, Tracy, I just trying to remember, didn't you do an EPC about 5 or 7 years ago? I forget whether it's for these 3 properties or it's for your others, but let's talk about that in the next week,
okay.
and make sure that we're either those debts are being satisfied or taken care of during this transaction, or what impact, if any, it has on your other properties. Okay?
Okay, you have a great memory, Greg, because you are 100% correct about that. So yeah, we can talk about that on another call. Yep.
Good.
Yeah, so that's everything that I wanted to cover today. Is there anything else that you had a question about, Tracy?
Not right now. I don't think so. We're feeling much better about the process, having had this conversation with you and Greg. But of course, we know there's lots of work ahead. So we're going to try and get all of the things we agreed to do today. We're going to try and get them done before our next call.
Perfect. As I mentioned, I'm going to send out a summary email that covers all the various things that we talked about. And if you see something that I missed or you want to add to it, please feel free to do so. Greg, was there anything else that you wanted to cover before we end the call for today?
Yeah, no, this is great. I think it's a good start.
Good, good. Well, super. Well, we look forward to all working together to get this sample PHA, the 3 properties that you all are converting through. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And then otherwise, we'll plan on talking to you next month.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Robert.
Good, Tracy.
So that's an example of what we think a kickoff call might look like. One of the things that I wanted to spend a couple of minutes looking at now after that.
Hey, Robert,
Yeah, sure,
before you go there,
Yep.
I think for all on the call is you sort of want to evaluate how effective was that call right then, and I think there's sort of at least 4 ways to evaluate a kickoff call. First is, did you make contact, right? Did everyone understand who the players are and what the roles are and all that type of stuff? And that's the easiest thing to accomplish. But the second is just expectations. Does the PHA now know kind of what's expected of them, more or less, it will clearly sink in as the weeks go on. But it seemed like in this case Tracy, was a little green at the start of the call because she admitted she hadn't wasn't as familiar with RAD. It seemed like as it went on, Robert was very successful in kind of laying out some of the major things and what she has to pay attention to. But that notion of what am I expected to do, you got to get that across. Because it's not you as the Readiness Transaction Manager who's going to be doing the work for them. It's the PHA that has to do it. And then the other things has the TM at the end of that call at least have a decent sense of the plan for each of these properties. Do you know? So in this case, Tracy says she's going to do a tax credit on one and a simple rehab on the other two. So he has a sense. It's not a transfer of assistance. It's a minimal relocation. They're not building new construction. These are all important things to get you as the transaction manager sort of initially out the gate, what you understand it. But then how ready is the PHA, right? And in this case, they haven't done the PCA yet, but they've at least identified the lender, and they're itching to go, right? She's expressed great interest in sort of trying to get these deals closed by the end of the year. That's great. We love when we hear that, that there's some urgency on the sake of the PHA. But so for all of you, that, again, sort of my sense is you'd evaluate these calls on at least those 4 levels: the contact, expectations, what's the plan for the project, and how ready is the PHA to move forward. Okay, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. That's a great point, and I think that you're right. I mean, the kickoff calls are critical, but only if they're successful in getting those points across. So I think you're absolutely right. Getting the connection and having the conversation is just one part of that. But what I wanted to do was to spend a couple of minutes showing you one way that you might attack the tracking part of this. And so we've just finished up our call, and what you want to do here is in this section that we talked about before, the checking correspondence, you're going to want to type up a summary email that describes all of the various items that were covered and anything that was decided. So, for example, one of the things that Tracy mentioned at the end that she wanted to do was to check on her EPCs. So PHA on there, EPC. Another thing that they were going to check on was the vacant land. So a list of items that need to be followed up on. We have a draft summary email that's part of the kickoff call script, so you'll be able to just kind of fill in and use that template, but certainly feel free to develop your own. But I would recommend that you use some sort of standard form, as this will be going out from you, the Readiness Transaction Manager, to the PHA, and so you want to be concise into what you're expecting to have happen. So once you type up whatever you're going to send, then you can either save the draft, you want to come back to it later, or you can send the email out. And since I've been, and this will be familiar to many of you, when you haven't been active on the resource desk, you time out. I think I was inactive on the resource desk for probably 40 minutes, which is, I think we allow 20 minutes of inactivity. So I'll come back in. The email gets sent out, and the text is populated below. So if the PHA responds to that, their response will come underneath this, and as my colleague Anker's name is here, their name will appear underneath their response. The other thing that you're going to want to do is go through and fill out whatever information you can from the call in this area. So they mentioned that they had their development team in place, so we will say that's yes. They seemed pretty clear and pretty confident with their ownership structure, so we'll say there's a yes. They have not completed their significant amendment to the annual plan, so that will stay no. They are a PBB administering agency, we found out, so we can select yes there. In this section here, we know that they are going for tax credits in the Lakeside Apartments. Didn't say anything about an FHA insured loan there, so probably should have asked if there was one or wasn't one there. Definitely we're getting new first mortgages in all three of these, so I want to update that. Also mentioned that they were doing relocation in all of the transactions, so we want to make sure that we've got those boxes checked.
Hey, Robert, just as you're doing that, we probably, in our script, when anyone says they're doing relocation, because it's such a large program risk to the program, is just there ought to be an automatic, oh, and remember, no relocation prior to closing.
Yes, great point, absolutely.
Just, we cannot emphasize that enough just because so many people have tripped up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. PCAs have not been ordered for any of these. We asked about that, so we should check those for sure. Confirm that this scattered site is in fact a scattered site, so we'll want to follow up and put the multifamily field office on alert as we get closer to that. None of them were transfers of assistance. One of the updates to the table that we've already got in place is asking the question about CFFP, OFFP, and EPCs. So Greg's question about the EPC, there will be a checkbox for that added to this. So you'll be able to check that as well. So once you
and even though you didn't answer the question, this change to configuration, there didn't appear to be, although we can confirm it on the next call, that there was any drop in the 3 bedrooms to 1 bedrooms or vice versa. They just look like they're renovating the existing unit. So we would probably want to confirm that in the next call.
Right, and you're absolutely right. And I think that I should have, in a follow-up, because in Tracy's description of the site, she mentioned the 1, 2s, and 3s, and mentioned that they were all converting. But I should have followed up with that to confirm that the configuration wasn't going to change. So that would have been a good place to do that. So you're absolutely right. Once you've made these various changes, then you just need to hit the save button so that all those things will be saved, so that you don't lose them going into the next time. So that is how I would handle that. I think that as this is used more and more, we will be making some changes to it, but hopefully this gives you a nice start to the tool and using the resource desk to track all of the various information that you need to track. So at this point, we've kind of gotten through our demonstration and shown you the various pieces of the resource desk and walked through the kickoff call. Wanted to open it up. Sure,
yeah,
go ahead,
Robert, just one more thing before the questions. Sure. So one of the major roles of the transaction manager is also to monitor milestones. Now, before we used to have a bunch of milestones, and we're focusing now on the 180-day milestone. But then the question is going to come up: well, what if someone's not meeting the milestones? Well, what do I do as a transaction manager? And we'll have a second training on that alone in the next couple of weeks. We'll schedule, and we'll do some role plays with that as well. But I just want to kind of lay out a little conceptually for you now what that might be. So we have both extensions of the milestones, and we have revocations. So revocations obviously is the worst, right? So something's really gone bad. So why might there be a revocation? Well, the first category of revocation is just simply the PHA is unresponsive. We've run into that before, believe me. Where they're just not calling you back. And if that's the case, and whatever their missing milestones, we have very little patience for someone who's not working with us. So the easiest case for revocation is where PHA is not staying in contact with you. But the major thing for revocation is just really a failure to make reasonable progress on the deal, even after they've asked for extensions and they still don't deliver. But we'll talk more about revoking. But then, what about extending a milestone? And likely the transaction managers will have sort of the authority to extend milestones for, say, 90 days without any other sort of approval from any supervisors or whatever. And then the branch chiefs will have another set of ability to extend milestones, and then ultimately it goes to the division director. But when it, one thing sometimes happens is someone may be going down a certain path because they were planning on one set of events, and at no fault of their own, a monkey wrench gets thrown at them. And so let's say they get an RPCA back, it's much bigger capital needs, and suddenly this local bank who was really comfortable doing a loan to them because they thought it was going to be light repairs doesn't want to do a new construction sort of permanent sort of deal, and the PHA then says, maybe I ought to now be thinking about FHA insurance. Well, that wasn't something they planned on at first. It's now going to take some additional time for that PHA to kind of get that project to the 180-day milestone, and that's fine. So you're going to document it, but it's a reasonable sort of set of events that wasn't sort of the cause of PHA. They did their best to sort of plan for this. But anyway, not that we will solve that today, but I'm sure that's one of the next thing on people's minds, which is, okay, now I understand the resource desk tool and all that, but what do I do with a PHA that needs extension? And so we'll cover that in one of the next trainings we'll do. Okay, Robert, sorry.
Great, no problem. Thank you. Yeah. So we've got some no hand raises that I can allow audio from. Jaime's got a hand raised, but he didn't enable his audio pin, so he can't ask. But we do have some other questions, and Greg, some of them I think I can take, and some of them I'll throw out for you. So the first question that comes in says, can you make changes to your comments after they have been saved? So the answer to that is no. Once the comments have been saved, they're permanently affixed, but you can certainly update them at a later date or clarify them.
And Robert, does that apply to both the comments or the email you send to the PHA as well as the ones on the left that's really kept internally inside HUD?
Right, exactly. So both comments and the emails, once they're saved, they're saved. So once the comments that the Readiness Transaction Manager's typed have been saved, they can't be changed. And once the email has been sent from their summary, that can't be retracted either.
Okay.
So but again, you can clarify them later, but you can't edit them. The next question is, will PIH and the Readiness Transaction Managers be able to share and look at each other's comments in the resource desk? And the answer to that is yes. The Public Housing Field Office and the Readiness Transaction Managers and anybody inside of HUD that's working on the transaction can see the HUD-only comments. The PHAs cannot, but other staff can. Next question is, what if there is a RAD application put in by the PHA that may not be designated substandard or troubled, but the field office has concerns with their performance? So, Greg, I'll let you take a shot at that one.
So it should have been, we should have gotten through the application stage. That if something was flagged in the field office through the review process, there would have been a thumbs up or thumbs down. So by this stage, the PHA has been approved to move forward. If the PHA is really, even though it was approved in the application stage, that it is somehow really falling down on its responsibilities in the public housing program, I think the best answer to start with is just for the field office to share that with the transaction manager, because part of the transaction manager has to do is assess whether this development team can deliver the goods. And and if it turns out that PHA, there's been board turmoil and a whole bunch of other stuff, then maybe that will affect the TM's assessment. But generally, if they've passed the application status, it would have to be something big to cause us to say they can't convert anymore. But it definitely is one of those things where you want to have communication between the TM and the field office on something like that.
Right. The next question is there a list that contains what can and cannot be done under RAD? By answering, Greg, you can certainly expand on it, would be the revised notice is going to be coming out soon, and that would be my first place to look. There are detailed lists and checklists and various other guidance pieces that are available on the resource desk, but I would say that the revised notice is going to be the definitive source. Greg?
Yeah, and just broadly speaking, I mean, what can you do under RAD? Well, what you're doing is you're converting to Section 8, either PBV or PBRA, and you can use any public housing source to sort of make that happen, operating reserves, capital funds, and all that, subject, most cases, to a subsidy laying review. And we have certain parameters around what type of financing you can put on the property. For example, no adjustable rate financing, no balloon payments before the contract term, things like that. So we try to corral it so there's nothing crazy. But essentially, we're allowing you to go towards, to move to the Section 8 platform within some certain constraints. Okay.
Thank you. The next question is, will the readiness checklist or some other issues summary be available beforehand to all on the kickoff call as an agenda for the call? Well, there's going to be there's a kickoff call script, there's a kickoff call agenda, and there's a readiness checklist that will be available to everybody. So all three of those things will be available to the readiness.
And Robert, will we send an email to everybody with that, or will it be posted on our website?
So
how will people who want to take a look at the readiness check? What will they do?
So the readiness checklist is going to be going to be on the resource desk and be embedded in the transaction area soon. The kickoff call script and the kickoff call agenda will be on the resource desk if they're not all there already.
Right. So right now we're still fussing a little bit with those, right?
Yeah.
They're not final, but
they're not final.
We've got drafts of them, but they're not final. So they'll be posted soon. If someone really wants a copy of the draft, just let us know. We'll send it to you.
Exactly. The next question is the HAP funding provided on a calendar year basis, i.e. beginning January 1st? If so, can the PHA provide operating subsidy to the new owner as initial operating period deficit funding? This would be roughly the amount of operating subsidy the PHA has been awarded for the calendar year in which the closing occurs.
Right, so not to go too far in the weeds on this because it's more a technical question than a resource desk question or a transaction manager question, but to say, yeah, we spent a lot of time in the RAD notice and in the new, what will be the revised notice, explaining and making sure that PHAs understand in the first year of conversion through the end of the calendar year, all you're getting is the funding that project otherwise was receiving under the public housing program. And if that's a little bit less than the RAD contract rent, that's all it's getting. And so the project gets funded with public housing funds through the balance of the calendar year, and then in the next calendar year, it actually gets funded directly from the voucher or the PBRA account. But yeah, the notice has with this revised notice, we'll have even better instruction on that.
Great. So that's all of the questions that we have typed, and there are no question hand raises. So, Greg, anything else from your end?
No, just to say again that we're going to do a series of trainings for all our transaction managers. So this is the second of the several. Again, what we'll do soon is one on just what do you do when someone's not meeting their milestones, how do you enforce them and stuff like that. But we'll also have some other stuff before we actually cut everyone loose.
Good. Well, thank you all for participating. We had a really nice turnout today, and whoops, we just got a question in. So before we depart, let's see. We've got under the check-in, you can save draft, and this would be available for the comments. So the draft can certainly be available for the comments as long as you're leaving it in draft. But then when you send it, and so let me scroll up to this section so that we're all looking at the same page. But the only ability to save a draft is on the check-in correspondence summary, and the idea there is you're typing down a bunch of notes to draft your email, and before you finalize it, you wanted to save a draft and go someplace else. So you definitely can do that. On the comment side, I'm struggling with why we would save a draft of those, but I'm certainly open to ideas. But the saving of draft comments, I just don't have a good answer for why you would want to do that. But I'll reach out to the person asking the question and see what she means by that. There's a question that says, has the roles and responsibilities been finalized? Any training for the PHAs?
Has the role and responsibilities been finalized? What's the second question?
Any training for the PHAs?
So we're still working, public housing, PIH, and RECAP are still finalizing roles and responsibilities. And so in part of this training, so we have a lot of PIH staff on the training, is to help us as we meet again this week and next week to finalize those roles. Now we have a better picture of everyone of sort of how day-to-day transaction management will look like. So no, that will be coming soon, but not finalized. And the training for PHAs, some of you have seen a draft of something we called, Robert mentioned it in the role play, but something called the welcome guide. It's about a 20-page document that kind of emphasizes sort of the key issues, the alerts, the tips in terms of when you first get an award. We're not going to do a training with the PHAs to go back over that. We expect them to read it. The only real training we've got next for the PHAs right now is when the notice gets published, we'll do a training on what's new in the notice. But right now, we won't do any training on what is transaction management or something. We expect that they'll read the guide and then be informed, and have questions. They can always ask the TMs on their calls.
And just to follow up on that, there are also a number of trainings that are still applicable that were done during this early RAD conversion pieces. There are trainings on RPCA, processing. There are a lot of trainings that are up already. And so hopefully, and there may be need to revise a couple of those, but generally most of those trainings are still prescient today.
Yep.
So, okay. All right. Well, that looks like that's it. I don't see anybody feverishly typing, and I don't see any more hand raising. So, Greg, if there's nothing else from your end.
Great. Good. Thanks you. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Greg. And thanks, everybody else, and have a good rest of the day. And just a reminder, this will be posted, has been recorded, and will be posted for everybody.